Now we will be transitioning to our Federal Working Group panel discussion. This session will include a discussion among members of our Federal Working Group on why and how the media is amplifying Big Pharma's talking points and what we can do to change the narrative. I want to introduce you first to Kristen, our Federal Working Group co-lead. She'll be facilitating the discussion today. Take it away, Kristen.
Welcome everyone to Media and Advocacy. I'm so excited to have y'all join us. I hope it'll be a great discussion for y'all. And we also will learn some skills to carry on with us. I first want to introduce our other speakers. We have Ty Beringer, who is a marketing and communications professional and has been living with type 1 diabetes for over 27 years. Ty's experiences include leading the Arkansas Insulin for All chapter, and serving as part of the Federal Working Group along with me and Sarah, and providing testimony to the Federal Trade Commission and Department of Justice. Sarah Skipper is a national type 1 diabetes advocate as well and has lived with type 1 diabetes since the age of 5. After rationing and sharing her insulin with her sister, who also lives with type 1 diabetes, Sarah became vocal about the need for affordability of insulin and has brought her some really cool places, including testifying in front of the United States Committee on Oversight and Reform. And in 2021, she met with the current president of the United States, Joe Biden. So excited to have you both here. We're first going to kick off with a poll question, actually a couple polls, to get to know the media landscape and the different actors of the insulin pricing crisis here in the US. So the first poll question: how many companies control most of the media in the US? And you should be able to click it. We'll give you like a few seconds to fill it out. So media includes television, film, print, internet providers, and even video games. We're asking about the US here, but it's likely the same in your country. There's only so many people that hold it. Okay, if we can end the poll, and 3, 2, 1. So 96% of people answered 6, which is correct, with 18 being the second choice there. So it feels like we have an unlimited variety of entertainment and media. We have so many different channels that we can watch through Twitter, through Instagram, through all the places you can get media. But only 6 media companies control about 90% of all news media, which that 90% might sound familiar in another area. And these private and public companies get huge funds from Big Pharma for advertising to cover their costs. So we are going to go to the second question, which is how many companies control what drugs cost for people with insurance in the US? And how many pharmacy benefit managers control most of the market in the US? So what are pharmacy benefit managers for people who are unfamiliar? They're also called PBMs. And unlike most other countries that have unified healthcare systems, the healthcare system in the US features a lot of different actors to eventually get your medication. So insurance is offered at different prices, and that can depend on your age, your employment, your job, your zip code, income, past military experience, your disability. So many different factors that go into getting health insurance. And in the US, unlike other countries, there's no national or federal mechanism to negotiate the price of drugs. And PBMs essentially act as an intermediary between the insurance companies and what we end up paying at the counter. So we're going to close the poll in 3, 2, 1. And 58% said 3, 31% said 6, and 12% said 9. And the correct answer is 6. So 6 PBMs account for 90% of the market. Again, 90%, much like the media in 2022. And the top 3, so that's, you might have heard of them, CVS, Caremark, Cigna, which controls Evernorth and Express Scripts, and then United Health, which is an insurance company that also owns Optum, accounted for almost 80% of those. There's a ton of consolidation, not a lot of competition or independent actors in the market, and so they can get away with charging really high prices and playing the rebate game. Okay, we're going to go to our third and final question. How many pharmaceutical manufacturers control most of the insulin production in the US? So there's a lot of consolidation in the media industry and PBMs, but what about the insulin manufacturers? This one is going to be really quick. We're going to close it now. And most of you answered 3, which is absolutely correct. Are we noticing a theme here? That there's only a little bit of actors in here? So very few corporations controlling large parts of the market. And that reduces competition in manufacturing, PBM price negotiations, and in the media. So while PBMs have a lot of consolidated power and do have reason to be blamed with the high prices of insulin, you've probably heard them being mentioned along insulin pricing lately. The big 3 insulin manufacturers hold even more power in this process. But because the media is so consolidated and so well controlled, they often follow the lead of where their money and advertising is going. And so, Sarah, I'm going to start this off with you. Why is the media only talking about PBMs right now?
Well, because that's what they're told to do. Like you just said, these pharmaceutical companies, they pay a lot of money for advertising um, on the media, so that's where they're told to do is to discredit the pharmaceutical benefit managers. And it's just unfortunate because they're not the ones to blame for the price of insulin.
Yes, thank you. And so, Ty, now that we know why the focus is on PBMs, how do we get the media to not talk about PBMs and to talk about the insulin manufacturers instead?
Yeah, Kristen, it really comes down to we got to create the media ourselves. We got to tell the media what's what, and that it's not all on the PBMs. It is the insulin manufacturers themselves that are setting these prices. Um, Sarah, you're exactly right when you say that they write these stories and they tell these stories because they're told to. We can tell them to tell other stories. We can reclaim the expertise that was ours in the first place. Um, a lot of times, these media companies, they just have a relationship with someone who's affiliated with the pharmaceutical company, and so they think to themselves, well, I got to write a story about insulin. Who do I know who knows a lot about insulin? And they reach out to these companies. Guess what? You can be that person. Every single person in this summit has a story to tell, and that story is powerful. Pharma has money and power and influence, but I would encourage you to feel like that's all they have. They don't have the story. They don't have uh, an impactful testimony about a time that they've had to struggle to afford insulin. The pharmaceutical companies, they will never have that. They'll never be able to tell an impactful story. And that's a power that only we have, and we have to tell it.
Thanks, Ty. Yeah, and I think in a lot of situations, reporters think in fairness, they have to reach out and get, the pharmaceutical manufacturers, their stories to combat patient stories. And so we ultimately have a ton of power to bring our stories there. And thank you for that reminder. So we had a question in the chat, and I think this is a really important one. We have our stories. Sarah, how do we get in front of reporters and how do we share our stories with them?
Well, I just want to piggyback off of Ty when he says like we have to tell our story, and a way that we can get in front of reporters is kind of just being in tune and in touch with the problems that are going on, because you never know if your local news will be covering a story, or regardless of that, just tell your story, put it out there on social media. Start a blog, do whatever you have to do to bring attention to these issues, excuse me, because somebody will be interested and they'll want to, go more in depth and want to know what's going on.
That's a great point, Sarah. And with so much social media access, we now have a new way to reach people with their stories. And Sarah's a great example. Her story is actually one of the first stories I found and before I got involved in advocacy that really inspired me to get involved as well by sharing her own story. One of the other questions I've seen in the chat, Ty, sometimes reporters ask questions that we don't want to answer. And I also saw Liz write something similar about like, if it bleeds, it leads, which is a common saying in media about you take horror stories from patients and not necessarily take them as experts in policy and how we can do reform. So how do we pivot to the question that we really want to answer?
Yeah, that's a great question. That's something, if you're talking to the media, you should prepare for. I don't think it's a good use of your time and energy to hope that you're asked all the questions you want to be asked. I think you need to be prepared and you need to master this like art of the pivot when they do ask you a question that isn't really on message, as some folks say. Uh, and so, in an example of that, when the insulin manufacturers announced their so-called price reduction, I texted my local reporter and I said, "Put me on the news," and they said, "Okay." And then I got there and they asked, "So how are you celebrating today?" And that's not the message I wanted to tell, because I'm sure you all know that there's still a lot of work to be done, even if those price reductions are everything we're hoping for. So I had a sequence of events. I acknowledged their question, and then I briefly answered it. I would say that's an optional step. And then I said, but, and I pivoted to where I wanted to go. So they asked me, how are you celebrating? And I said, yeah, today is a good day for the advocates who have earned this victory. But the fact is that prices are still really high. There's all these problems that we've got to solve, and the work continues. And now I'm going to spend the next 3 to 5 minutes talking about what I want to talk about because I answered her question, but I did not cede my time. And that's really what you've got to learn to do when you talk to media is take ownership of that story. They're not always writing in a story with an agenda. Sometimes they just, they don't know what questions to ask. And they're going to lean on you to be the expert. So it's up to you to be that expert that you are. Everyone here is. So don't be afraid of that. And yeah, learn how to make that pivot happen. So acknowledgement, a quick answer if you want. You say, but, and then you move on to what you want to talk to.
That's a great point, Ty. And I also want our advocates to know that it is perfectly acceptable to say you don't want to answer a question. We're the experts of our own situations, and some of it might feel outside of our scope. So it is okay to say, I'm going to pass on this question for now, or if that's not your focus, to say, hey, I'd rather pivot like Ty said. So I noticed two other questions that we didn't really answer. The first one is, beyond social media, how do we reach new services? So Sarah and Ty, maybe Sarah, if you want to start off on that question.
One thing that I would suggest is, like, how you have your local newspaper or whatever, you can write a letter to the editor and you can, write them and let them know like this is an issue that you've seen and you feel like needs to be covered. And that's one way to get their attention. And then also every newscaster or whoever literally has social media, even though I know that's not the focus, but they have like an email. You can email them or call. They still have desk phones or a work phone, so you can call them or you can reach out to them because they broadcast the news, but we're the ones who are living in this life. And as it's been mentioned, we're the experts of our reality. We know we have to live this, and so in order for people to know what's going on, we have to put the word out there and let people know this is not people are losing their lives from not being able to afford their life-sustaining medicine in a country that is like $1 trillion in debt. So like, it just doesn't make sense. And we have to let people know that it doesn't make sense.
That's a great advice, Sarah. And I also saw Nicole put in op-eds as well. Like you said, Sarah, about the local newspapers, I know they're always looking for op-eds. They always publish them. And so starting there is great. It doesn't have to be the Wall Street Journal or the Washington Post for it to be effective. And then we had one question that was like a little bit more of an international perspective. And I thought that would be a little fun for us to pitch. What do you expect from foreign media? And I'm gonna like broaden that maybe a little bit in that, Ty, when you are trying to talk to some like international outlets, how do you shape that story, or yeah, some of those considerations?
Sure. Yeah, that's a great question. I think a really important thing is that you have to contextualize the situation. In other countries, in some other countries, this is not a reality that people face. Uh, Dealing with insulin rationing, dealing with having trouble affording insulin, dealing with this huge cobweb of the insulin manufacturers pointing at the PBMs, who point at the pharmacies, who point at the politicians, who then circle back around to the insulin manufacturers. So you have to be armed with some information. The good thing is that every single person in the summit is now part of a network, and someone here has that information. So come prepared, ask your friends, ask me, ask Sarah or Kristen, say, hey, I got an interview coming up and I could use a little bit of info. And we're going to be here to help you out, because that's what we do as advocates. So you come ready with some facts. You contextualize this and say this is the reality of the situation in the US. The way the situations happen is bad. The results are bad, and here's what we want to do about it.
Thank you so much, Ty and Sarah, for sharing your wealth of experience. You left us some really great advice to take with us for our next media interviews and even trying to get more media. So thank you so much for sharing this with all of us.
Yeah, thank you, Kristen, for hosting, and pleased to be here.
Yes, thank you. Pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kristen. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Ty. That was a really insightful conversation and something that I'm only recently learning about as we continue to get media coverage for our US and global programs at T1 International. Thanks for sharing about how we can turn the media towards the real reason why insulin is so expensive, and that the big three insulin manufacturers are responsible. Thank you for also sharing what we can do about it, share our personal stories.